Do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending these assets? Have you penetration tested these public assets? Start 2017 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night. Welcome back, everyone, to Startup Security Weekly. Make sure you visit itpro.tv/startup security. Use the code SS30. Try it free for 7 days and get 30% off your monthly subscription, including the supervisor portal where your organization can purchase training for the entire operation. We just talked about communication, learning new skills. IT Pro TV is one of those resources that you can use to get everyone's skills up to where they need to be so you can have better conversations. So make sure you visit them at itpro.tv/startup security. I think that's it is that it for announcements? Do I have another one? SANS Pentest Hackfest is in there. That's happening. SANS.org/Hackfest17. The $300 off is Hackfest17 is the discount code. Providence HackCon is an event being hosted by Security Weekly in collaboration with Roger Williams University. It'll be at the Providence Public Library. Go to securityweekly.com/ProvHackCon. We are inviting everyone to come to this. It's primarily for students in the Cyber Patriot program, but anyone who feels passionate about getting our youth involved in cybersecurity is more than welcome to come. Myself, Doug White, Ben Jackson, and Ron and Cindy Gula will be presenting. We've had Ron on the show. Of course, they run an angel investing firm in cybersecurity. So make sure you come check us out. It's a free event, Providence Public Library, October 21st. securityweekly.com/ProvHackCon. Make sure you check it out. Michael, what do we got this week?
Well, we got some discussions on leadership and innovation and startup success, and then there's some news, including some news that came across the wire about an hour before we recorded. So we'll get to some of that as well. What do you think about emotional intelligence, Paul?
I was puzzled as to what it means. What is
All
that?
right.
Like,
So
how do emotions play into intelligence, Michael? Enlighten me.
Well, so that's the interesting thing. This got popularized in the mid 90s. So a lot of us know about IQ test, and that's your intelligence quotient. And it's a way to say, basically, how smart are you? Are you qualified for Mensa? All that type of stuff. And what we started to realize is that there's another level to it, and that's the emotional intelligence. And that boils down to there's a lot of layers, and there's a lot of layers in the empathy. Empathy is where we tend to see that a lot. And it talks about your ability to regulate your emotions, but as well your ability to read and help other people with their emotions. And so what I always look at is, if you look at empathy, there's a tactical empathy, which I think is actually really powerful. And that's the ability to read somebody else's emotions and act or react to it in a very tactical way. But then there's also the ability to be more strategic, which is where I'm envisioning it from your perspective. So we just talked about that with Elizabeth. If I can look at it from, okay, what does a developer need to know, and what does an IT person need to know, and what does a security person need to know? That at some level is empathy and possibly emotional intelligence, depending on how you're able to look at it. Now, what's happened is, over the last 20 years or so, there have been a number of books written about it, and a number of people have said that this is the difference, that this is what it needs. And you see this a lot in security. And so I actually I'm a big fan. I call it burn it down. Like, take everything you think you believe and burn it down. So I've been a big believer in emotional intelligence because it resonates with me. I look at that, I go, oh, the ability to read an emotion, the ability to see it from somebody else's perspective, the ability to understand it as they might understand it. That sounds really cool to me. Okay, that's really cool. And a lot of folks then have come back and said, that's what it takes to be a good leader. That's what it's going to take to be effective at security, because people don't understand. You've got to understand them. So I go, all right, I buy it. So it turns out that so again, we're going to go back to Tomas, because I'm absolutely loving the stuff that he's writing. And so he posits, should you consider emotional intelligence when you're hiring your startup's team? And we see so much written about it now. People go, oh, absolutely. Yeah, totally got to do it. So he dug into some of the research. Now, what's interesting is he also quotes Adam Grant. Adam Grant wrote a really popular book recently. The name is totally escaping me. So I know some of you are screaming right now. And darn it, when it comes to me, it's a good book. So he looks at a lot of stuff, and he said, look, EQ, EI, it's completely overrated. But what's really interesting is they said, look, we're going to go figure out how well you are at doing your job. And the first thing we looked at is your cognitive ability. Can you learn? Now that fits everything we were just talking about.
Mhm.
And then we look at conscientiousness. So, and then we'll look at your emotional stability. Can you regulate your emotions and stuff like that? And what they find every time they look at this and they try to do it from a controlled research perspective, they've come back and they said, look, most of this we don't understand. And as a quick aside, but completely related to it, there was a big shift in the 90s called CBI, cognitive behavior interviewing, or cognitive-based interviewing. And the idea was, instead of saying, Paul, tell me about your experience, what I'd say is, Paul, tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a supervisor. What was it like, and how did you resolve it? And the idea was, if you were trained in this, and this is the problem, most people weren't trained in this, but if you were trained in it, as you were talking, I would listen for things, and then I would have you push deeper in them, or we would shift a different direction. Or if you were really trained, I would actually flip the script on the spot and watch how you reacted to that and where you went. And the idea was that would give me a better understanding of how you would act in our environment. Now, there's a lot, I have glossed over this a lot. Well, this is the same thing here. So what they're saying is, look, we looked at it, and we said, you know what? Emotional intelligence didn't matter. Like it was like less than 1%. So in other words, high IQ, low EQ doesn't matter to me at all, because frankly, you may or may not be good with it. Now, there's some other people, and in fact, to be fair, there's some neat stuff in here to go track down. But basically, what it comes down to is, if you think emotional intelligence is important, it might be, but don't neglect these other pieces. And if you want to be perceived as having higher emotional intelligence, then make sure that you do a better job at describing your emotions. I'll tell you where I fit on this. The answer, I think, is yes. Like I've never thought that if you only had emotional intelligence, throw the rest of it away. Oh, you're so highly emotionally intelligent, you're good to go. I think what's always happened is if you have a good level of emotional intelligence and you possess these other things, you're better off. Now, if you possess those other things and then you add an emotional intelligence, like we look, oh, it's less than 1%. I'll tell you what, 1% in some cases is the difference between success and failure. So here's my take on this. Should you say, I want someone who's got this level of emotional intelligence? And by the way, you can test for it. You can develop it.
It seems like there's a science behind it, Michael, which is interesting.
There is. And so my point on that is, should you get hung up on it? No. Does that diminish the need for it? Also, no. And so I wanted to just put that out there, because I keep seeing so much around it. And what I would say is, if you just go to the subset of empathy, do you have empathy? Can you think about our last conversation? Can I understand that there's a developer that's got a job to do and really doesn't care about this security thing? But can you understand it? Not get pissed about it, not say it. Can you actually understand it? Because P.S., you're in the same situation. Cool. All right, then that's empathy. And if you can learn to deploy empathy tactically, I think you put yourself in a really good bit. In fact, Paul, we keep talking about the books that we like. I'm really going through Brain Audit again right now. I've been talking to people in the last couple of weeks a lot about Play Bigger. There's actually a book I'm going to tell people right now. It's a bit of a different playbook that we're going to talk about next week. And I've already read it. I'm going to reread it between now and Friday. So we've got some really good insights on that. So when we get to this part next week, there's another book in there. But tactical empathy is brought up in Never Split the Difference. So we're going to have to get Chris Voss on the show. And I've been remiss. We're gonna keep working on pulling some of this stuff into there, but I think it's really good. So anyway, all right. Here's the next piece, and I tell you why I like this, and you and I we're gonna talk through it. It came up. It actually, what I loved about this is talking about 8 signs that you really need IT due diligence. It came up in one of the investment newsletters that I follow.
Yeah, but it's an infographic, Michael, and therefore
it is an
I tend to just dismiss them.
I did too. And they tend to drive me absolutely bonkers. Here's the thing I liked about it, though. Think about this, because I'm going to go through. We're not going to go through all of them, but do this 8 signs. So this is from a private equity perspective. We see the PE marketplace continues to heat up, and so what they said is, okay, are you assessing the vulnerability of a prospective portfolio company's information technology infrastructure? So are you taking a look? So if you say, oh no, they're a small target, right? And if you're private equity, small targets are still millions of dollars. And so here's what I found. They said, look, here's the questions here's some signs that you really need to do the due diligence. Number 1, the team can't answer basic questions. Look, you and I know this all the time, but I'll tell you where else we see this. Third-party risk. I've started. I've helped some companies develop their third-party risk processes, and now I find myself coaching smaller, mid-sized companies on how to answer it. And I'll tell you real quick, and this is something I like. I haven't. Now, maybe it's self-selecting, but I haven't worked with anybody that said, listen, just tell me how to answer these stupid questions so they stop asking it. I've had people reach out and say, okay, we need some help understanding the questions.
Mhm.
We need some help communicating it internally so we can make our process change. And this is the thing I'm really starting to get excited about, because not only do we want to satisfy it for this client, but Michael, wouldn't that make it more competitive for us? Like, couldn't we then use this as a selling point now?
Right.
And I went, oh, there you go. So by the way, for everybody who says that this stuff doesn't play out in security and it doesn't make a difference, it totally makes a difference. So if your team can't answer basic questions like, what kind of sensitive data do we have? What are we processing? What would happen to us, right? You know my favorite question on this.
Oh, yeah.
What happens when a breach happens? If you can't answer that question, you're in problem. Other thing I thought this is really interesting. It's young and it's a high growth company. This is that concept, and we keep teasing it. And I'm sorry because I know I keep getting emails on it, and I promise that when I can, I will make time on it. But this whole notion, Paul, you and I've talked about minimum viable security. If you're a small company and you're in that MVP, minimum viable product stage, you're getting excited. But what happens is you're basically saying, okay, I'm going to just do this one thing until we've got that product market fit, or we've got the traction, or we get some money, and then we're going to change it. Well, what happens a lot of times with security is, A, we don't think about security at that stage, and then B, when things grow up and get bigger, we also don't think about security, so that by the time we get to our growth stages, we're like, oh, we probably got to think about security. Yeah, same thing then. So they're going to outgrow their offices. They're going to outgrow their technology infrastructure. They're going to have to pay back some of that technical debt. But when I look at minimum viable security, whatever you do in the beginning, recognize then that at some stage of your growth, you've got to look at security differently. One of the things I like to ask people now is, what are you doing today and what are you doing later? And by the way, people always want to know, like, is there a checklist? No. I want to know, did you think about it? I want to know, was it an active thought process on your part, and did you make a set of decisions based on the best of your abilities now, with the understanding that it might change? So I thought that was really kind of interesting. It goes on. It says, if you're in a highly regulated industry, if you work with government agencies, if you depend on cloud infrastructure, if you've already grown through aggressive acquisition. And so I thought some of that stuff was interesting. I thought they were actually good questions, and I thought that then they were worth us bringing up, not just if you happen to be listening as in you're in private equity, but also if you're a startup. Can you answer these questions? Are you comfortable answering these questions? And before you hand wave me and say, "Oh, but I'm in security, Michael," of course we can. Can you? Can you really? Because Paul, you and I break it down every week where people are struggling with this stuff. But also then, let me ask you a question. If you're on the enterprise side, and you're one of our enterprise leaders watching the program today, how many of these questions are you asking to do your due diligence before you work with them? How many do you need to ask? And are your procurement people asking these questions, and are you happy with it? So it's one of those things where, again, I think it fits from multiple perspectives. I kind of went on a tear there. Any of these stand out to you as totally asked that? Or
Yeah, I think that it has so many different angles and perspectives you could take on it, right? Because we do this when we talk to vendors, right? We ask the kind of due diligence questions about maybe their marketing program, maybe their business plan, maybe how their products are solving problems. If you're in an enterprise, you want to ask this of, I've had these conversations with the different business units. How are you approaching IT and security, to get down to how much due diligence you're doing, how much have you thought about in respect to operations, security, and all of those things. So I like it because it kind of gets me thinking about the different question sets I would have for different audiences about doing their due diligence.
Yeah, I like it. All right. So the reason I'm kind of like pausing here for a second, there's a couple pieces in this week, and I've already got a couple weeks sorted out where I'm starting now to try to help us collectively as an industry, and this matters as much to the security leaders as everybody else, start to understand some of the investments, some of the marketplaces. So we got two stories here to talk about some of these investments. So this one's Elizabeth Yin, another person I find I'm really enjoying her writing. And so, as I find these things that are useful, I will grab them, and where I can, I'll fit them in. So she's talking about ICOs. We'll talk about what that means in a second, and how they're going to level the playing field for entrepreneurs. Now, there's been much written lately about the funding process. And I think, Paul, you and I seem to be aligned in, don't lose your shirt over it. Like, don't worry about it. Like, go build a company. And I would even say, I kind of felt like Elizabeth was saying the same thing on the interview.
Yeah, like go build a company, get some sales.
Go build.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go build, get some sales, and go figure out where the money is. And if the money's coming in and it's making sense, then good, do more of that. And if not, then you probably don't have the right fit. By the way, we've talked to a number of VC, and I've talked to a number of VC off camera and off mic, and I've said, hey, what do you look for? And guess what? Especially in security, they're looking for, do you have traction? And I say, okay, so what are you looking for? And they go, I want to know, did somebody give you actual dollars for it? Now, this is important because I'll say, well, does it have to be like, we talk about fee integrity, like what I think my full price is? No, Michael, I want to know, did somebody give you money, and did they continue to give you money, and did then more people give you money? Oh, okay, cool. So what happens then is, if you take a look at the other side of this, there's a lot written right now, and we've talked to some people about it, about the struggles of getting funded. And the struggles are sometimes broken down by gender. They're sometimes broken down by geographic access, right? So you and I have, and we've tried to showcase where we see pockets popping up and different types of things happening. So there's this thing called the ICO, the initial coin offering. So this is right now, it's going to be a lot around blockchain and a lot of those different types of things happening. And it kind of feeds into our next conversation around crowdfunding, except for it doesn't. And the idea here is that what Elizabeth is saying, I'm going to try to break it down, and I'm maybe not doing it as effectively as I want to. So she's got a fairly lengthy article. Go take a look at it. But what she says is, look, the way it works today is, if you're part of the right pedigree, I want to just leave it at that. If you're part of the right pedigree, and you're in the right location, Silicon Valley, and you met that pedigree, then your chances of getting funded are higher than somebody else's. And that's not her point. And I think this is a good point. And she'll say that's not fair, but that's life. I tend to agree with that. But she'll say, but that may mean that all of their successes come from somebody who meets that pedigree, but by the way, so do all their losses. So what she said was, look, I think that if we can start to democratize this a little bit better, it's a good deal. But what we're starting to see, and we've seen this here on the East Coast a little bit, is you start to get these syndicates together. So they're angel investors that band together, they're early stage investors that band together, and they try to raise bigger funds. Bigger funds give them more money. More money means that they can make better strategic investments, or that they've got a different place. And she's like, yeah, reality, it's made a dent in some areas, but it's not really gotten us what we wanted to. But when you get to these initial coin offerings, all of a sudden now what happens is I've taken some of the logistics out of it. It doesn't matter where I'm located as an investor. It doesn't matter where you're located as an entrepreneur. It doesn't matter what you look like. What I'm going to look at is much more meritocracy. I don't know if she actually used that word, but that's kind of, as I'm reading her stuff, it basically says, look, I can have a much more efficient infrastructure, including how you get paid, how you get your money, how that works out. I can get you geographical access around the world, and I'm going to have a lot more objectivity in evaluating the companies. And so what she'll say is, and I think this is true to a certain extent. I'll quote from her piece. When you walk into a typical VC office today, if you're tall and you've got a booming voice, you're already at an advantage. I'm 5'8". I am never gonna never gonna have that advantage. I have to walk in on stilts or something. So, it's now what she says here, and this is what I like. All that matters is if you can run your business well. And so I'm going to quote from her, and this is the promise I see in ICOs. You'll be judged by your execution and your merit rather than how you look and sound. And she said, look, we're pretty far off from this, but we're looking at new methods. And we're going to talk about another one in a week or two. So I'm starting to outline some of these new methods that are looking at ways for companies to get funding, for people to get recognition. And frankly, I still hope that that's one of the things that we could do on this program. And so let me just say this real quick. If you're on a startup side and you've got something that you think is interesting and you want to talk about, what I'll say for you, with this program, you want to fall in love with the problem publicly, and you want to come talk about that with us, you've got an open invite. Reach out, and I'll have a chat with you. And if it fits, we'll get you on the program. Same time, if you're in the enterprise today and you're trying to solve some problems, tell us what problems you've got, and we'll help amplify those as well, and then we can start to help the industry sort some of these types of things out. Because I don't think it's just about money. I think it's also about these inefficiencies. I mean, Paul, what's the last number we saw? 2,000, 2,500 funded startups in just the United States alone doing security. Yeah, how can you possibly pay attention to that?
There's like 50,000 in Israel alone too.
Yeah. Well, and you and I talked about this briefly. I mean, so try being a startup today, try being a vendor, and we have this ingrained in our head, right? That, well, you've got to pay for Gartner, or you've got to pay for one of these research analyst houses, because a lot of people depend on their research, and you've got to be at RSA, and you've got to be at Black Hat. And the question that I think you've always got to ask is, okay, and if there's 2,000 other vendors there, how do you stand out from that noise? How, and people are like, oh, but we'll take everybody, we'll pile them into a booth, and we're just going to make it work. Wow. There has got to be a better way. And I think that's what gets me excited, Paul, like, especially when you and I get the chance to talk off air about some of the stuff that we're able to do, it's we're at that neat intersection between the community and the industry. And so like we bring on somebody like Elizabeth who's excited about solving community problems and found a model to do that while she's also advancing the industry. Oh, that's cool. Like we need more of that. So anyway, I thought that was pretty cool. Now here's the flip side. We've talked about crowdfunding. If you remember, the SEC relaxed its rules early part of this year, late part of last year. I don't remember when it exactly took effect. And they said, look, you don't have to be a certified accredited investor anymore, and we'll allow you to do this. We'll allow you to do more crowdfunding. And the idea to a certain extent was now, right, kind of like we just said with the ICOs, now we can democratize. Now, instead of going to one person who's got to write a $250,000 check or somebody who's going to write a $2 million check, everybody can just kind of do their parts, right? And when you say crowdfunding, people go, oh, like Kickstarter. What's interesting too, and by the way, they've done this and they've looked at this on Kickstarter and other places. The answer is, well, here's a surprising answer. It's not really doing innovation. And you say, well, wait a minute. So this is all about being innovative. No, what we typically find is that people are looking for things that are useful. So a lot of times what is most successful, people are excited about things that are already working, that they already understand, that they're already proving, and that fit a functional need in their lives.
I also think my take on that, Michael, is early on in crowdfunding history, I think everyone was excited, like, oh, I'm going to go, fund all these different things. And then they realized the stories came out after those early investments, if you will, that they never got their product, or it never took off, or there was issues, and they got burned. And now, fast forward a few years, people are much more cautious when they invest, and they're not as heavily investing in the really innovative and risky products because of that first wave of investors that got burned. That'd be my take.
I think it's a good point. Yeah, I mean, all right. And in fact, you know what? Let's take that, because I think you've raised a really fair point that probably needs to be amplified. When somebody's drawing the conclusion today that says crowdfunding doesn't actually reward innovation, what you're saying is, guys, we're evaluating this on too few data, not enough cycles. There was an early cycle, and now we're in another cycle, and people got burned, and people are learning from it. And I was gonna point something else out, and you tell me if you think this fits the same concept. Go look at some of these descriptions, and they really suck. I don't understand the problem they're trying to solve. I don't understand what they're doing. I don't know why you'd want that kind of money from me. I don't understand how the hell you set the pricing on it. Like, I don't understand any of it. I mean, it sounds cool, but like, whatever. Versus imagine a company that actually explains, this is the problem. This is why we didn't like any of the existing solutions. This is why we're going to crowdfund it. This is what you get from it. This is how we set the pricing on it. This is what it looks like. And you read it and you're like, they get it. They totally get it. Okay, I'm going to go after it. I mean, I don't think sometimes the problem with innovation is that people don't understand it because they don't understand it. I think it's because it wasn't explained properly, right? We didn't translate it into something other people understand.
Right. No, it could
Do you think that fits into it?
It could be a communications issue. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to like make everything. Like, I'm very much not a.
No, I know.
You're a hammer. Everything's a nail. It's all about communication. It's just, it's what I. Well, it's I'll even one of the stories we're gonna look at later. I look at it and I'm like, okay, I know a lot about the marketplace. I understand why it sold. It sold at a good multiple. I get everything about it. But I go to the website and I go, I don't actually understand what you're trying to do. We just based on a plain read.
I like your story. Your storytelling story is good, and I've got a story about your storytelling story. It just
you know what? I'll let you lead on this one, and then I'll make the point. That
it's funny. Basically, this article is saying when you tell a story in support of making a sale, don't make it about you. Make it about someone else, your customer. And I agree. Some of your stories should be like that. However, some stories about you are also pretty profound and very compelling, and can be equally as effective. And I'll tell you what.
Give me an example.
I bought this product. So you know me, like I buy like random things sometimes based on ads and stuff. So
you're into crowdfunding.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's sort of. Well, this was a crowdfunded product. It's a hangover cure. Like we need that in security. I mean, certainly as we get older, we need that. And so I don't know that I've gotten drunk enough to really test the true effectiveness of this product. Clearly, I need to do some more product testing and do some more drinking. But the story that was associated with the product, I saw the advertisement. It was compelling enough in the advertisement that, well, basically I was like, yeah, I could definitely use a hangover cure. And I started reading the story, and it was told from the person who developed the product, and how He traveled to South Korea, and they were all drinking this drink that was a hangover cure. He couldn't get his hands on it. He happened to be a biochemist. He developed it on his own. He spent a lot of time getting really drunk and testing his own formula, and came and said, I got it. And so I'm like, yeah, I'm going to try that. That's good. Like I said, I don't know that I've been drunk enough to really test it, but his story was compelling enough for me to buy it. Now, it also is solving a problem that's somewhat kind of funny and unique, and there was
hold on, though.
that aspect.
You've raised something I think is an important point, and that's the about us part. So we still, I know we keep wanting to pretend, well, it's all about facts and figures. It's all about no, it's about emotion. We have to put emotion into it.
Right.
So a lot of times you're gonna look at this and you're gonna go, this is just BS. This is some dude just trying to sell me a bunch of vitamins and a freaking shake. Screw it. I don't need this crap. But when you read the about us, right, what you're doing is you want to. So here's the funny part. Even the way you described it, that about us to some extent was actually still about you. Now, I haven't read it all the way, and maybe it's not as much as some. But what you wanted to know was, or maybe you didn't want to know it, but what was presented to you was, look, I'm a real person, and I had this problem, and I tried to solve it this way and this way and this way, and it didn't freaking work. But I saw this. It was kind of interesting. And you know what? Here's my freaking background. I'm a biochemist. So I said, damn it, I'm going to do it my way. And I did. And the first time it didn't work, but I did this one, it didn't work. But then I got this one and it started working.
Yeah.
And so what did you just learn? I'm a real person. You can trust me. How many times have we gone to websites and you try to look at the leadership and you're like, who the hell are you? Like,
right.
What do you do? Or my favorite, and I don't mean this is very facetious on my part, in case you can't tell. You go to a security website. We are very good at security. We've been doing it for 20 years. Okay, cool. About us. We are very good at security. We've been doing it for 20 years. That doesn't mean anything to me. I've been doing this for 21 years now. I don't know you. I don't know who you are. And I've been in it long enough that, I mean, clearly we've crossed paths or pissed each other off at some point. So, hi, like what?
Well,
so
and
listen,
you know who does that well?
That makes a lot of sense.
And I'll give them a free plug on the show, System 76. And when you go to their website and you read the about, like, it's their employees and it's all about like their hobbies and their passions on their page.
Yep.
It's not just like, hey, we're really good at building Linux systems. Like, no, it's more about them. And I tell you what, their whole customer and user experience, not only are they good at what they do, but they have personality. Like, one person in the support ticket was like, oh, I see you do like a cigar podcast or something like that. Like they actually like are like real people that are interacting with you. Which I applaud that company for having that kind of culture. Their culture comes through in their business processes and in their marketing on their website. So
and so when you tell those stories, you feel more comfortable because you're dealing with an actual person. So here's what this is saying, and it relates. What we tend to see a lot, and we see this chronically in information security, and I've even worked with some vendors to try to fix this along the way. They want to tell me the story. So the story goes like this. Johnny couldn't solve XYZ problem with XYZ technology, and then he found out about our product, and it worked great, and Johnny loved it. The hell is that? That's not a story, right? If anything, it's a chronological listing of facts. Chronological listing of facts aren't stories. So just as a reminder, when you're dealing with story, and I know everybody was beginning, middle, end, stop at that, unless you really know what that means. Classically, you have characters, you have conflict, you have resolution. Characters have emotion, you have conflict, you have resolution. And I think I put this on my blog at one point. You know what? Maybe Paul, this is something we can rework to show people, but here's what it comes down to. Instead of telling me that story, tell me what it's like. Tell me what people tell me that you understand, so you get what it's like to be a security person who had to miss your child's soccer game again, and you've missed date night for the third week in a row or third month in a row, and you got a little extra around the midsection, and you're getting up a little earlier, you're staying a little later, you're freaking stressed out, and your Saturday mornings aren't fun anymore because you got to get on a sales call, and you're losing your freaking mind. And then they come along, and you've promised them you can do X, Y, and Z, but frankly, they've been promised so many things. They got 50 vendors to manage. This thing is freaking nuts, and now they're looking at it going, you know what? I'm probably going to get fired if I do this. I've never heard of you. I don't know who you are, blah, blah, blah. Okay, well, so they did something that got them to say yes. And it's amazing to me how many companies don't ask that question. Because I'll say, well, why did Charlie or Johnny or Sally say yes? And they go, well, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Well, guys, what finally convinced them? Because that's part of that struggle. There's a conflict, and they do that. And then, so it just worked great. Like, they bought it, and 20 minutes later, like, well, I should have signed the PO months ago. They're like, well, no, not always. I go, okay, so what did that process look like? What were they afraid of? And that's that conflict. And then so what's the resolution then? And by the way, don't get too crazy with it, but you know what? I have seen products where you saved enough time back in the day. You saved enough time back in a way that it all works out that guess what? Now I don't have to work Saturday mornings anymore. Now I have not missed a child's event in a while, right? Or whatever it is. They felt better. They're less stressed. There's got to be an emotional appeal to this. And if you can do those things and you make the person you're talking to that hero, so you've got to show them that you understand. Now, it can't just be bullshit, right? Like, you've got to actually understand. I get like what your life is like.
Right. It can't be like a hook for some of the headlines that we cover, right? It's more, I like to start my stories with something somewhat, and this is a very delicate balance, and start it with something somewhat outlandish and somewhat controversial. Yeah. Right, and that's how I lead in with all. And Jason Blanchard taught me that great comic that I can't remember his name, that starts his story with, when I was in college, I was in the Russian mafia. Like, that engages your audience. It relates. Even better if you can ask them a question. So he'll start that with, how many people here went to college, right? And I think we've talked about this on the show. And they'll say, well, when I was in college, I was in the Russian mafia. So now you've engaged your audience, and you've said something kind of controversial and outlandish that really hooks people in. And that's just, this year, one of the things I really learned about storytelling, that was kind of one of my now not so secrets about how I start some of my presentations.
Yeah, well,
is I try and start them with that. But you can't force it. It can't be, I think some of your points, Michael, right? You can't force it. You can't go too far with it, because then it loses its luster.
No, and what works for some people doesn't work for everybody. Yeah. And then, the thing I always warn people is, if you understand comedy and humor, use it. If you don't, please don't, because it will never work in your favor. But what you're also talking about is what Sean D'Souza calls the first 50 words. I always call it the first 30 seconds. You've got to give me a hook. And if the hook is, and we see this on these websites, I solve X. Do you want to know more? No, actually, I don't really care.
No.
Like, I just, but. No. To your point, if you do something that's outlandish, I love asking. I'm always going to be down to asking a question.
Yeah.
Questions emotionally hook us. If you ask that question in a natural language, the language that the person you're trying to talk to would typically think about it or ask it, you elevate them, you capture them. You don't have a choice. They don't have a choice. It's the way our brains work. But to your point too, I actually like talking about things that are maybe related. I remember I did a fishing thing for one person one time, and this was when. Deadliest Catch was like at its peak of excitement, and like we kind of made the intro a little bit like Deadliest Catch and the crab walking into the trap and everything else. And I said, look, it's a show now that makes millions, and these guys go out there and risk their lives for it. What about you sitting at the desk, right? And I don't remember exactly what that connection looked like, but that's basically the way that we put it together, and it was really kind of fascinating. So it lets people get a chance to be that hero as they go through it. So it's kind of cool.
Sounds like you got some kids screaming in the background, Michael. Some insights into Michael's life. It's good.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It always reminds me of that that news clip that you see where the guy's doing the news interview and the kids are walking in. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Yeah,
it's all good. It's all good. Don't sweat it. All
right.
Yeah. So let's talk about the startup and security news you need to know. I love the title.
Yeah. So, well, I'm trying to think about how we shape and focus on these things. So this headline captured me, so I dug into it a little bit, and it's really kind of interesting. But Social Capital it's a new fund that they're raising, and they want to take startups public without an IPO. So basically what's happened is, and I'm going to add a little bit of my own editorial to it as I'm kind of looking at this. It boils down to this thing called a SPAC, a special purchase acquisition company. And so what typically happens right now, and it's interesting because when we talk about ForeScout in a minute here, they did something I also thought was kind of interesting. I didn't know as much about. But when we see all these people doing these raises, they get up to these debt rounds. They've got to go figure out who their brokers are going to be. They've got to figure out how they're going to price the marketplace. They enter a quiet period. They've got to do all this different stuff around it. And then they get to a place where they push stuff in. And then boom, you go public. And what we seem to see these days is the folks that go public are all these unicorns. Like, well, now I'm at $1 billion of valuation, so now I can go public. Now, and in fact, right, that's essentially what's happening with ForeScout. So what Social Capital says is, you know what, we can do this and we can do it differently and we can do it better. And because we can do it differently and better, you don't have to go through all the hype. You don't have to go through all the pressure. It's a very different process to it. And I just wanted to call it out. I'm not aware of anybody doing it right now in the security space, but let me highlight the trend now just in today alone. We're going to have ICOs There's a lot more private equity money coming in. The VC money is still there, and there's a really cool connection between those two that we keep exploring. You're going to have ICOs, you've got crowdfunding, you've got angel syndicates, you've got investment syndicates, you've still got your startup accelerators and all these other pieces coming together in different ways. And I've got more that we're going to go through, and then you've got this thing called a SPAC, and it's a way to be able to IPO and get access to those marketplaces and those valuations without having to go through the traditional channels. So it's just one of those things that I would pay attention to, especially if you want to keep in touch with the space. I think these things are interesting. All right, Slack and Oracle. We're going to keep talking about Slack for a couple of reasons. We're going to keep talking about Oracle for a couple of reasons. They're huge. I mean, Slack's valuation now is nutso, and the only way that's going to work is somebody huge is going to have to buy them, right? I mean, let me rephrase that. With their $5 billion valuation, it's quite possible that the way that Slack makes their money back is that they IPO, that they become the platform, that they pull those things together in that particular way. But what I thought was interesting this week was Slack and Oracle are now in a partnership, and then I dug deeper into it, and what they're basically saying is they're going to integrate Slack into most of the Oracle applications so that employees can ask a question like, how many vacation days do I have left? And the bot's going to just look it up and answer it. What's the policy on X? The bot's going to look it up and answer it. And they're going to do it through Slack. And I thought, wow, that's actually kind of interesting for both Oracle and Slack. But, keep in mind, Oracle's not afraid of huge acquisitions. Now, we thought it was going to be Amazon, and Amazon went and bought Whole Foods. There's not a ton of people left. I mean, Google's developing their own stuff. Microsoft's developing their own stuff. Amazon may or may not come back into it because they made some investment into it. They've got some ownership. Oh, now they have a partnership with Slack. Okay, cool. Right. So Oracle and Slack. But anyway, I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting for a couple levels. I think it's interesting because we're seeing how people are doing it, how they're integrating differently, and how they're looking at all these different types of things. It's not necessarily a pure play security story, but gosh, it's certainly interesting. But that said, how much twisting would we have to do to see a security angle to it?
No, not much. Slack is very heavily used today by IT and security teams more and more, and developers. So my prediction, for whatever it's worth, I think Slack is kind of either fought off or had acquisition deals go south, because Microsoft was rumored to buy them. And I think you're right, Michael. They've progressed to a point where they're just going to try and be a player and just dominate the category. So,
yeah, and they might. I mean, I would say, frankly, they strike me as the category king. But then you go look at things like monetization. Where's it going to go? And so it's one of those things that I'm kind of fascinated. Like, I like it, but they make enough available for free, and now they're figuring out how to let you interact with people who aren't in your team or aren't in your organization. It's cool. By the way, you and I have friends that are on their security teams that have done really awesome stuff. I mean, I don't have anything bad to say about Slack. It's just more me looking at it going, where and how does that work? And how does that fit? All right, Forensic Logic. So what's interesting about them, they're maybe not in our core focus all the time, but $20 million equity round. So we'll see where that goes. SaaS-based law enforcement sharing. So I thought it was kind of interesting. And just $20 million in equity is kind of a big raise. But the two that I think are more worth talking about, ForeScout. ForeScout filed a $100 million IPO. By the way, the last money, so they've raised so far about $100 million, and in their last round, the quote rumor, but the expectation on the last raise, which was about 2 years ago, was put them at about $1 billion of valuation. But the thing that kills me is they're still losing money. Like, if you go look at their filing, they're still losing money. It's my own personal bugaboo. I know some of you who really get the finance are like, yes, but eventually, and I get it. I bought into it. I totally understand how at scale over time there's a tipping point and you start to recover it. The reason, in case anybody comes and checks out our show notes and says, why the hell does Michael cut and paste in these descriptions? These are the descriptions that people put on Owler about their stuff.
Yep.
ForeScout develops cloud-based network solutions enabling organizations to continuously monitor and mitigate security exposures and cyber attacks. I don't know what the hell that means. So, it's, well, and look, I'll be candid. I always feel bad when I knock people for the stuff. Like, I've somehow built this reputation that I'm always the positive guy, and I'm optimistic. In fact, I've started calling myself Optimistic AF because I think it's funny, and I have a lot of optimism in me. But like I'll tell you what, I go to their website and I'm like, I don't really get the problem that they solve, except for this. They have this one line. It's called Above the Fold, transforming security through visibility. Ooh. Now they trademarked that, which is also funny. But what I'm noticing, Paul, is that when we ask people about like CrowdStrike, we ask people about these other companies, they go, well, I don't know what they did, but what I really liked was visibility. I got visibility. A lot of the articles I've written lately, people are talking about we lack visibility. I want to gain visibility when I got visibility. So I thought that was interesting, but we'll see. We'll see where it goes. They're priced out and they'll lead out to market, so we'll see.
We tend to pick on vendors for their marketing and messaging, and I think it really stems from the fact that doing positioning, messaging, and communicating that out into the market is really hard. And I can say that with a certain level of authority because I've held positions in companies and been responsible for that for certain products, and it's not easy. And I feel bad that we do kind of pick on people, but while it is difficult, it's something that you have to get right, and that's why we keep harping on these points. So.
Well, yeah, and let's be clear too. It's the same thing when we talk about, oh, there's a shortage, oh, there's a talent gap. No, there's not. There's just not. And I know people get so pissed at me every time I say it, and fine. So send the hate mail to me, not Paul. But the reality is the organizations that understand the problem they're trying to solve and the value in creating it, and they understand the impact, they then go get people to solve those problems. And they understand how the hiring process works, and they understand how to take care of their people. Maybe they have itpro.tv and they train their people properly. Mm-hmm. But the point is, I don't see people struggling with this. And so if we go to these websites, you're going to do $100 million IPO. You're valued at $1 billion. And I go in and I look at your website and I go, I don't really understand where you play. That's crazy to me. Like at that point, and look, I appreciate it. You might have, we do 10 things. Cool. That's also kind of like, really? But okay. So in the same level, but this one's more interesting, plus I understood it a little bit better. Guidewire acquired Science for $275 million. Now, we covered Science a year ago. They took on a $40 million Series A. And I remember at the time it was like $40 million for Series A. And, Elizabeth said, sometimes you look at people, or maybe this was off camera, but, some people take like way too big a round. And I remember thinking that as like a Series A, a $40 million Series A. Now, maybe it wasn't really an A. Maybe it was just papered as an A. That's the new thing, by the way. That's going to come up in one of our coming weeks. We're going to talk about that. But here's the thing. What do they do? And it's interesting. So in this one, if you come to our show notes, I copied both. I copied what the description was an Owler, which was useless. And then I copied what they had in Crunchbase. And I'll tell you what, this is what it was said in Crunchbase. So I'll quote it. Science has developed the industry's first, okay, knock that off, economic cyber risk modeling platform, quantifying cyber risk in probabilities in dollars. Science's unique solutions help the insurance industry more effectively manage cyber risk from prospecting and selecting to assessment and pricing and managing portfolios, exposures, and accumulations. What was interesting to me, especially since I wrote a piece at the end of the year looking at cyber insurance, you and I have talked about this, and we've talked to companies that do this, and we're going to keep looking at this. It's one of these interesting things in our industry where when we say cyber insurance, people go, oh, you mean breach insurance? Well, so you mean like I failed, so screw you, you're just going to pay for it? Yeah, so A, no. B, if you feel that way, please stop, because that's not the way that any of this works. So what's interesting here is the insurance industry as a whole, it needs a way to make more money. It needs a way in order to spread out the risk, and in order to do that, it needs to better understand the risk. Now, if you go look at the way that classically we do this, we build up these actuarial tables, or we build up these tables, and we ask all sorts of questions at a time of underwriting, and we ask all sorts of questions at time of claim. Well, because everybody's jumping into this insurance marketplace, that really hasn't happened. In fact, it's been almost detrimental. Now, it'll bounce back. It's just a question of how long it's going to take. Well, science comes along and says, you know what, we can build an economic model. We can go measure the data. We can measure the data better. We can look at it better, and then we can figure it out. So they get Guidewire buys them. Guidewire supplies software to almost all of the major carriers and down to the office level. So now I have better information at understanding what your cyber exposure might actually be, which means I can write better policies, which means I can price these things even better, which means I can offer better coverage to it. So here's what's fascinating to me about this. they're fairly new startup. Like I wrote it down someplace and I'd have to go look it up quick. But like let's say last 3 years, $40 million Series A last year, and they sold for $275 million. So depending on what that really looks like, I mean that's a good multiple. That is a really healthy multiple. And some of the stuff we've chronicled before is that fintech and insurance tech, big areas right now for investment. So I think anybody right now who's focusing on ways to quantify this risk and to democratize it, I think they're in a really good place. And so but by the way, I went to their website and I was like, right, so admittedly, this is an area that I study and I kind of geek out on a little bit, but I still looked at their website and I was like, I'm sorry, what do you do exactly? So,
Tell me about your
it's
journey,
just kind
Michael.
of the way that our industry goes. I'm going to be in Atlanta. I'm going to venture off the beach. I'm going to be in Atlanta Tuesday. I'm keynoting on the 3 questions to earn respect for your leadership. It's interesting. Just to talk about this for a second. What's kind of fascinating. You've been very gracious about bringing this type of stuff up. Value proposition. If you understand value proposition, a lot of us go, "Oh, that's what a vendor has to offer." Yes. Also, if you're going to go make the case for anything you're doing, whether it's getting a new hire or getting more software or putting in a different solution, you have to be able to do that. But it also becomes a really cool way to evaluate the requests that are made of you, because there's only so much time in the day. So a lot of the challenges that we have today in security are that we're perceived as leaders because we have that in our title, or because somewhere along the lines today somebody said, well, you got to have a security leader. Okay, Paul, congratulations, you're the security leader. And you're leader in title only. There's this really cool stat, which is terrifying. Most people get promoted to their first position of leadership in their early 30s, and they don't get any fundamental training or support until their mid 40s. There's between an 11 and 12 to 15-year gap in terms of really learning how to be a leader. And we're like, well, you should just magically understand it. So what we have right now is a lot of situations where we have security people that are leaders. And if you look at the headlines and they'll say stuff like, well, I'm not really regarded in the C-suite. The board doesn't listen to me, but that's got to change. I'll teach you how that changes. And that's the keynote that I'm going to give on Tuesday. In conjunction with that, and my website's not done yet, but the coaching got launched. I'm going to keep it small. It's high performance coaching. In fact, I realized it's actually, it's you talk about like where the money goes and trying to figure it out. So what I've figured out is, and I've already mentioned this, is that I've helped a couple people like figure out, like they're firms with people that have their CISSPs, or they're security people. They love it. Maybe they listen to our show, and they've said, you know what, I need some help making sure my executives understand it. I need some help making sure that the vendors that we're working with know that we're taking this seriously. Michael, can you coach me through it? But then what I've realized is it's actually not just coaching, right? It's personal training and it's advisory. It's asking the questions that they want. So it's kind of blending the things that I like to do and finding a pretty interesting model to teach people straight talk and value proposition and show them how they can identify their value and then translate that so other people understand it. And
I don't know.
It started to come together. And that was fun. It started to come together. So I like how it's working. I got a workshop. So I mentioned last time, Dallas end of the month, and then Boston the beginning of next month. And I'm going to try to make a week out of it. So if somebody's in Boston and they want to explore working with me, I'm going to make it work so that way I can come up to the studio and we'll get some time in studio. It'll be my first trip to the studio. So I don't want to be disappointed. So no pressure, but Awesome. It needs to be kind of awesome.
Well, thank you so much.
Slowly I'm going to get the rest of it going.
Thank you so much, Michael. As always, this was a fun episode of Startup Security Weekly. Thanks, everyone, for listening and watching. See you next time.